Hi, and welcome to That's Ready Mysterious. Join me for an intriguing look into real-life mysteries. Who was the mad gasser of Mattoon? What was whaling at the Wilga waterhole? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts and references for all episodes can be found at that'sreadymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about the Bog People of Northern Europe. The director of the Silkeborg Museum in Hovedgården, Denmark, Ole Nielsen, said of Tolland Man, "You can really meet this person. The face is the body part that has most expression of the human body, and so this is really fascinating to meet an Iron Age man more than 2,000 years old that looks as if he could wake up at any moment." The Bog People are mummies that have been found in bogs across Northern Europe. They are usually found in raised bogs, which are dome-shaped masses of peat that frequently form in lowlands and reach depths of up to 9 meters or 30 feet, or even more. Blanket bogs are shallower and spread widely across wet or upland areas and are not usually where the mummies can be found. The first bog mummy was found in Schollholz, Holstein, Germany in 1640. Since then, many more have been found. So far, the oldest bog mummy that has been found is the Kolbejer man found in 1941 on the Danish island of Funen. It dates to around 8000 BC. Andrew Mould was a peat cutter from a family of peat cutters who spent his day harvesting peat from a bog called Lindau Moss in Cheshire, England. A lot of Andrew's male relatives had worked in the bog, so Andrew had been going to Lindau Moss since he was a kid to watch his father work. Cheshire is in northwest England. One day, while working on the bog, Mould uncovered a solid round object. At first, he thought he had found an old-fashioned football, or a soccer ball if you're American. When he cleaned the ball off, he discovered it was actually a skull. It was so well preserved that it still had brain matter within, and one eyeball was still preserved. He had read about cases of finding body parts in bogs and had found bits and pieces himself, but this was new to him. Mould went to the police in May of 1983 with the skull. For more than 2 decades, the police thought a man named Peter Rand Bart had killed his wife, Malika de Fernandez, but her body had never been found. After Mould found the skull, police told Rand Bart that they had found a skull not far from his home, and Rand Bart confessed to killing Fernandez, saying, "It has been so long, I thought it would never be found out." However, the skull did not belong to Fernandez. It belonged to a woman who had lived about 1600 years earlier, now known as Lindau Woman. The following summer, on August 1st, 1984, the remains of another person were found in the bog. At first, harvesters found a leg, then a torso and head were carefully unburied. The mummy was sent to a British museum, which determined that the mummy was a man in his mid-20s, standing about 1.73 meters or 5 feet 8 inches tall, and weighing 64 kilograms or about 140 pounds. Lindau Man, as he was now called, lived sometime around the 1st century AD. Miranda Aldhouse Green, emeritus professor in the School of History, Archaeology, and Religion at Cardiff University, explained that what was so interesting about Lindau Man was that he was almost killed 3 times over. She explained that his death took a while and that he was killed by people who well understood anatomy. She said he was hit in the head hard enough to stun him, but not hard enough to kill him. Then he was strangled at the same time that his throat was cut. For hundreds of years, body parts like those belonging to Lindau man and woman were found in bogs like Lindau Moss across northern Europe. Peat bogs are conducive to preserving the tissue due to their highly acidic but low oxygen, watery properties. Bacteria and other microorganisms can't survive the bog to break down organic tissue. This keeps biological remains preserved for thousands of years. The same process that turns sphagnum moss into peat also turns bodies into bog mummies. We still are not entirely sure why the bogs conserve bodies so well, however. People preserved in bogs range from Ireland to Germany and come from as early as 2000 BC. Even earlier bog skeletons, without any surviving soft tissue, have dated to as far back as 8500 BC. Archaeologists think it's strange that the bog mummies were buried in the bogs. The preservation itself is not the only strange thing, but also that these bodies were buried at all. Burying the dead was not the norm at the time when these bodies were interred. During the Iron Age in Europe, burials were rare. The dead were usually cremated, given sky burials, or some other similar practice. It was also strange that most of the bodies seemed to be those of young adults, teenagers, and children. Most of them seemed to be healthy but disabled. Some were naked except for preserved pieces of rope, a hat or a cloak, and sometimes with clothing buried nearby. A number of the bodies had suffered very violent deaths. The Lindau man was probably alive when he was interred. He was buried in the deepest part of the bog, and it seems that he probably went of his own volition. Aldhouse Green explained, "The perpetrator was very knowledgeable about human anatomy and knew how to keep this person hovering on the edges between life and death for quite some time." Going on to say that there is water in his lungs, so he was breathing when he was put into the bog. His last meal was barley-based and maybe a little charred. He ate plain food called a griddle cake as well as mistletoe. The mistletoe might show that there was a connection between his people and the ancient Druids. It's possible that the mistletoe was given to Lindau man to keep him calm for his oncoming death. Lindau man's last meal was not the only strange last meal that the bog mummies ate. The Danish body, now called Grobael man, was an Iron Age farmer who lived around 390 BC in central Denmark. His last meal was more than 60 different types of plants, all put together as a porridge of cereals, bitter weeds, and more than 13 types of grasses. This could have been a ritualized meal, or possibly an embarrassing meal. There was also a psychoactive substance, ergot, in his meal. This would not have been a calming agent. Aldhouse Green said that it would have caused him to behave oddly. He would have been making weaving movements, as well as making him very hot and cry out. It's possible that this was a part of a ritual sacrifice. Possibly the best preserved face from ancient times in the bogs is that of Tolland man. This mummy was found in a bog in Denmark on May 6, 1950. It is currently in the Silkeborg Museum. The acid of the bog turned Tolland man's skin a bluish-black color. His stubble and hair were turned bright orange. He wore a sheepskin cap. The pores of Tolland man's skin were visible, and his eyelids were closed as if he were in a peaceful sleep. Apart from the sheepskin cap, Tolland man was wearing nothing but a woven belt around his midsection and a noose around his neck. If he had been wearing a wool garment when he was interred, it would have also been preserved. There wasn't even an imprint from clothing on his skin. The condition of Tolland man's body suggests that he died in a ritual death. Ole Nielsen said that it looked like he could just wake up and ask, "Oh, where was I?" Cashel man is one of the oldest bog mummies. He was found in 2011 by a milling machine in Culnamona Bog in Cashel, Ireland. His body dates to the Bronze Age, around the year 2000 BC. That's older than King Tut by about 700 years. Cashel man is an outlier. Most of the bog mummies are not this old. Ida girl was found in 1897 by peat diggers in Ida, Netherlands. Finding the body scared them so much that they said, "I hope the devil gets the man that dug this hole," and then they fled. Ida girl was wearing a wool cloak that hid a stab wound near her collarbone. She also had on a thin strip of cloth wrapped around her neck 3 times with a slipknot indentation below her left ear. Roy van Beek, an archaeologist at Wageningen University and Research, said that the cloth around her neck was probably used to strangle her. Van Beek did the first comprehensive study of the bog bodies that have been found and believes that the tradition of burying people in the bogs lasted for 7,000 years. He published his study in the journal Antiquity and created a database of more than 1,000 bog mummies from 266 historical bogs across much of northern Europe, ranging from Ireland to the Baltic states. He said that 57 of the bog people's causes of death can be determined. Of those 57, at least 45 died violently. Tolland man was hanged. horsemouse man had bone arrows in his skull and sternum. 7 of the people seem to have been killed by several different violent methods at the same time, referred to as overkill. Almost all of those overkill victims died between 400 BC and 400 AD. Most of the places where bodies were found only held one body, but some were used more than once. The Danish bog, Elken is thought to have the remains of more than 380 ancient warriors, all killed in conflict and left in open water. All of the 380 warriors were male, most were adults, and they date to the early 1st century AD when Germanic tribes were fighting each other. It's believed that the dead were removed from the battlefield and dumped into the bog, still wearing their weapons and adornments. Although Lindau man, Tollen man, and Graubel man were all most likely human sacrifices, not all bog bodies are. In the case of Lindau woman, there was not enough evidence to say her death was a ritual killing. Some bog people got caught in the bog and died. Some were murdered, and some died by suicide. It's possible that the bogs were seen as the correct places to put dangerous bodies, in part because the church didn't want those bodies in their graveyards. Some scientists don't believe that all bog bodies should be put into one group because they died in different ways and for different reasons. Some of the bog people may have died of disease and were put into the bog to prevent further spread. Between 1100 AD and 1900 AD, 6 of the people may have died by suicide, and 4 may have been accidental deaths. In 1674, a man and a woman died in a snowstorm on the peat bog of Hope Woodland in Derbyshire, England. In the same century, Gunnister man was thought to have died by exposure. In 1828, a German traveling salesman and falconer, Johann Spieker, most likely died by drowning in Lower Saxony. Van Beek said that his grave was marked by a wooden cross and a fence that continued to be visible for many years. The only things that were found with him were his cloak, some coins, and a prayer book, all found nearby. Aldhouse Green doesn't believe that any of the bog people died by suicide. She says that many of the bodies were naked, some found with clothing nearby, and that doesn't make sense for a suicide. Why were some of the bog mummies killed? Were they executions, or maybe sacrifices to the gods? Aldhouse Green thinks that sacrifices may have been made at times of struggle. One thing that is common among the bog mummies is that most of them are young and many were disabled. Aldhouse Green thinks that the disabled may have been thought to have been touched by the gods. Today, bodies are being found less often. Peat is not being used as a source of fuel as much anymore, and the peat that is harvested is done using large machines that would grind up any bodies that might come out. How did the bog people die? Why were they interred in the bogs? How do peat bogs preserve bodies so well? What do you think? Leave a comment and let me know what you think. Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ready Mysterious. Join me next week for another captivating mystery.